Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar to give you an update on how Powerlink is progressing with the RIT-T for system strength in Queensland. It's really great to be able to have so many people join us today. Carl, I might just get you to start sharing the slide pack.
Yeah, absolutely. And good day, everyone.
Thanks. I do want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners and the lands in which we are gathering here today. I'm joining you from Yagara and Turrbal country in Brisbane. I want to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge any First Nations people on this call, and the important role that First Nations people will play as part of the energy transition in Queensland. I'm not going to talk too much because we've got a jam-packed agenda. We've got a couple of members of our team. Oh, see, I forgot the disclaimer. I always forget the disclaimer. So just so that we're all clear from a legal perspective, I won't read through this word for word, but I'll give people 5 seconds just to note and acknowledge the disclaimer, which will guide our discussions for today.
Oh, sorry.
All right. No, you're right. Good. Just onto the agenda. So I'm just here to really make us sure that we get through what we need to in the hour. It's not a long time to get through the content that we have for you today. We do want to allow times for questions. Just from a logistical perspective, we're actually going to be asking you to put your questions in the Q&A function, which is actually just to the right of your chat function. I know for a lot of us, we use chat function to put in questions, but if we could ask you to put your questions in the Q&A function, and Eleanor, who's on the line, will actually probably just shut down the chat shortly. So as we move through, we're going to get through the slides, and you can put in your questions as we go in that function, and then we can allow for some more verbal questions once we get through that content. So without further ado, I might hand over to Carl just to give us an overview of where we're up to with system strength and what stage we're up to with regards to the RIT-T process. Thanks, Carl.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad we had such a great response to this webinar. I'm Carl Davis. I'm the Manager, Portfolio Planning and Optimization, and I'm leading this system strength RIT-T with a large team of people behind me driving this journey. I might just start with what is system strength. So system strength is defined in two ways or two parts. The first is the minimum requirement. It's specified as fault level, but it's really about having sufficient system strength for the power system to function and transmit power. Things that are relevant to that are effective protection operation, maintaining voltage control, and maintaining system stability during and after a disturbance. And the second part is about the efficient requirement for system strength. And it's specified as the stable voltage waveform, but it's really about maintaining stable operation of inverter-based generators during and after a disturbance. And it's also worth noting there's a strong locational aspect. So solutions perform better when they're near the location there's a requirement, and the value of a solution reduces with distance, so as it moves away. Key dates. Actually, before I get into key dates, I just, as a bit of a reminder, Powerlink is the designated system strength service provider for Queensland, and is required to procure system strength services for AEMO to enable from December 2025, which is at the very end of our timeline there. The RIT-T is a three-step process, starting with the project specification consultation report. We call it the PSCA, and it was published in early 2023. And then you can see on the left there, the project assessment draft report, or the PADA, which was recently published on the 4th of November. And it finishes with the Project Assessment Conclusions Report, or the PACA, which is currently targeted to mid-2025. But the key date right now for people to be aware of is the submissions to the PADA close on the 20th of December 2024, so in a few short weeks. Quick overview of the PADA. So we've had, in response to the PISCA, the first project specification consultation report that we published in 23, we've had 80 unique solutions come in, which was a great response. We're very happy with that. And they're across various technology types. They're on the screen, I won't read them out. But from these solutions, portfolios were developed and assessed to test the relative value of various combinations. And we will explore those portfolios in coming slides after the technical consideration section. The PADA submissions process is similar to a competitive request for proposal process. And to be clear, we're not intending to do an RFP process, but it is similar in nature. And that PADA submissions will be assessed and options selected to proceed through negotiations and contracting in a competitive way. So it's really important that the submissions that are made to the PADA include the best available information and pricing so that we can assess with the best information. Contract negotiations will be staged with the first tranche required as soon as possible for the December 2025 start date, or where lead times require contracts to occur now, with later tranches of contracts will be closer to the requirement timing, and again, allowing for any lead time to make sure that the solutions are delivered on time. It's probably just worth touching on here that there is in the framework an optional advanced determination process that Powerlink may elect to use for some contracts, but not clear whether we will or not just yet. And with all that said, I will now pass to Cheryl, who will walk us through technical considerations.
Yes, thanks, Carl. And hi, everyone. My name is Cheryl Nerona, and I work as a principal engineer in the Power System and Performance and Connections team. And I was also involved in the technical assessment for this RIT. So whilst there were various solutions proposed, as was mentioned by Carl, it was very important for us to verify what was technically feasible to address system strength, including locations and combinations of services. For instance, could they support the minimum need or support additional renewable connections in future? And now these checks were performed in a detailed simulation tool for electromagnetic transient studies called PSCAD. And this tool can be used to identify potential system strength issues using very detailed models of renewable plant, other generation in our network. In addition to that, AEMO's 2023 system strength forecast of renewables for upcoming years was also used as input into these studies, and this included the forecasted wind and solar installations all across Queensland. However, the studies were limited to a 5-year outlook as detailed modelling becomes less accurate with too many assumptions required for modelling inputs in future years. In addition to certain inputs and assumptions such as forecasts rapidly change over time. For the earlier forecast years, Powerlink had access to site-specific modelling of renewables through the standard connection application process. And then in future years, generic models were needed to be used as detailed models of renewable plant were not available in those timeframes. In terms of the efficient services, grid forming batteries were utilized and then gradually increased in the studies for future years as the forecasted renewable generation grew. So as Carl mentioned earlier on, there is an obligation on Powerlink to maintain a certain level of minimum system strength. And what the detailed studies show is now to 2026, the minimum requirements can still be met by existing coal, gas, and hydro plants across all Queensland as per our current arrangements. However, in later years with coal retirements, alternative synchronous machines could be used, such as synchronous condensers or gas units. But to note, the location of the solutions is important, as Carl also mentioned, for system strength provision to wind and solar. And also importantly, the minimum services are also used to support the broader power system stability above system strength. In terms of location, for instance, trying to support system strength in North Queensland is not helped by utilising services in South Queensland. However, we do note that there are overlaps and sharing of system strength between nearby regions such as Central and North Queensland, which we have considered in the assessments. The other obligation introduced earlier was for Powerlink to ensure that future renewables are supported in regard to the stable waveform requirement above the minimum need, which are the efficient services. Now, taking into account the renewable plan forecasted by AEMO in the study, services and locations were identified in certain years for the efficient need. An initial efficient solution in North Queensland around the Ross area has been identified for 2026. However, as the wind and solar installations grow to 2028 across Queensland, more and more efficient solutions are actually needed across North and Central Queensland. And then in 2029 and 2030, even more efficient services are needed all across Queensland. The technical studies did consider grid-forming batteries to fulfill this need, and indeed the studies show that this technology has the potential to fulfill the need. The size of the various battery solutions that we considered in the study was around 200 to 300 megawatts as the more optimal size to provide these services, depending on the need in the area. However, efficient services could be provided by other equivalent types of technologies, such as synchronous condensers and potentially even grid-forming STATCOMs. It is important to note here again that the studies were based on AEMO's 2023 forecast, and our obligation does change within a 3-year rolling window. So if the forecast changes or generators self-remediate for system strength, not only could this impact on the efficient services timing, but it may reduce the need for efficient services in associated years. So given this uncertainty, we intend to procure services close to the requirement timing, allowing for any lead time, and therefore our focus initially will be to procure in the North Queensland for the North Queensland service for 2026, and then to follow a staged contracting approach for later years. So we understand that there's been a lot of interest in the grid-forming battery specifications and our expectations on its performance for providing those efficient services. And so we thought we'd briefly touch on this topic. So where there are grid-forming submissions, battery submissions that fall into those Queensland locations of efficient need discussed in the previous slide, we would require further information. And this would only be required for the shortlisted grid-forming battery solutions. This information is also additional to the generator performance and connection application process. So if shortlisted, the information we would require from the project would be a detailed electromagnetic transient PSCAD model of the battery, as well as for the battery projects to perform simplified studies, what we call SMIB studies, which are over and above the studies considered in the connection process. The assessment studies would also need to cover the ability of the battery to damp oscillations and also information and studies to confirm its short-term overloading capabilities. Now, while short-term overloading can be provided through various means in the battery design, a minimum amount of overloading is expected to be provided without reaching battery limitations, noting that higher capabilities and more information would certainly be preferred. PowerLink will also evaluate the grid-forming aspects of shortlisted batteries using detailed modelling that will be provided by the battery project and the full Queensland network model. The initial round of these assessments will be focused on the 2026 efficient need. However, similar assessments will need to be conducted closer to the date of the future efficient needs as well, such as for 2028. So now I'll hand you back over to Carl to talk about the portfolios considered. Thank you.
You're on mute, Carl.
That's better. Thank you. Yes, we'll get into the, thank you, Cheryl. We'll get into the portfolios now. So there are 5 portfolios that were developed, but some solutions are common across the portfolios for various reasons. They're on the screen. I won't read them. Some of those reasons were that they were relatively very low cost compared to other solutions or already contracted. And so we're common across the scenarios. The 2 gigawatts of batteries that are shown there for the efficient requirement were covered by Cheryl in the efficient slide. These are the portfolios. So there's 5 of them, as I said. We started with portfolio 1, which has a balanced mix of technologies. And then additional portfolios tested the benefits of different technology types by increasing the amount of that technology type in each portfolio. You can see the name there. Some portfolio 2's got extra synchronous condensers, portfolio 3 turbines, portfolio 4 pumped hydro. Portfolio 1A explores how a BESS in the minimum compares economically, but it's important to note that Powerlink must complete some activities to build confidence in how BESS will support effective power system operation, especially around safety critical protection systems. Here we have the estimated net benefits of each portfolio under the ISP step change scenario. You can see there portfolio 2, synchronous condensers, has the highest NPV by $128 million. But it's important to note that the assessment is very sensitive to the project status. So committed, anticipated, already in service projects, according to the RIT guidelines, are included in the base case and then common across all options. So the capital costs are effectively removed from the assessment, as opposed to model projects where the capital costs are included in the option. And as an example there, the capital cost of Syncons is relatively much lower than the capital cost of the modelled pumped hydro that's in portfolio 4. And this has driven the lower net benefits despite the associated market benefits that were created by including it. So exploring portfolio 2 further, as it has the highest net benefits, a total of 9 Syncons are built out to 2034. In 2026, system strength is provided by existing synchronous plant. And then by 2029, the existing synchronous plant is supported by 3 Syncons in central Queensland. And in 2030, 2 more synchronous condensers are added in CQ, 1 more in SQ, sorry, central Queensland and southern Queensland. And then in 2032, another 2 Syncons are added in central Queensland, with 1 more Syncon added to central Queensland in 2034. The 2029 Syncons need to be procured as soon as possible for delivery by 2029. However, Powerlink is very keen to explore alternatives to the 6 Syncons that are required between 2030 and 2034. Powerlink has included reopening triggers in the pattern to enable alternatives to those Syncons, as Powerlink recognises that projects will continue to be developed, and where they become anticipated or committed, it will lower the cost of that solution in the economic assessment. However, timing is critical. It's important that alternatives become anticipated or committed early enough before synchronous condenser lead times and can provide confidence of delivery on time. Touching on some commercial considerations. So the commercial parameters we published, I think it was December 2023, have been updated and are included in Appendix G of the PATA. So people can see what we're thinking. The timing challenges discussed in the minimum and efficient slides are really important. Some contracts for services will be required now and others will be required later when they're required, allowing for lead times again. And again, the PATA submissions process is competitive like a RFP process in that the RIT defines the need at a high level, looking for solutions that meet that need. And as the PATA submissions are the opportunity to participate and be selected to proceed through the process, it's important to include the best available information and pricing in your submission. Hold on, here we go. The pricing structure shown here, again, I won't read it out, but it's sourced from the AEMO provisional security enablement procedure, and will be our contracts will be structured with pricing in this manner to fit with AEMO requirements. I think it's important to be clear here that Powerlink need to demonstrate to the AER that costs are efficient. The price structure is targeted to procuring services beyond or different to how you would normally expect to operate your plant in the market, so that Powerlink can demonstrate the contracts are cost effective. Examples of contracting beyond normal market operation might include things like reserving system strength services for Powerlink or guaranteeing availability of plant beyond what would normally be available, and could include costs to cover the additional or guaranteed availability, but wouldn't be limited to that. And certainly keen to explore that as we go through with proponents. Powerlink intends to procure sufficient services to ensure the minimum and efficient requirements are met, recognising that some plant will already be online providing system strength via normal market activities. Powerlink will consider those normal market activities in choosing how many services to procure. Next steps from here. So new submissions are very welcome. And if you've already provided submissions, please make a submission to the PADA to confirm your solution is still available and provide any updates. This will help us to avoid any unnecessary modelling work, if they're not, or if we have out-of-date information. And it's important to provide your best information and pricing in your submission so that we can make the best decisions in our packer. There are some key topics that we're specifically seeking feedback on. The proposed reopening triggers, which together with the stage contracting approach provide a flexible mechanism to procure low-cost alternatives or lower cost alternatives and create better outcomes for consumers, is the first one. The second one is the updated commercial parameters, again in Appendix G. So do get in there and have a look at those. And lastly, seeking options to manage energy revenue exposure. And certainly don't think we're the best place to form views on this in isolation, so very keen to get the inputs on all of that. Just recapping on the key dates, the one that's in front of us right now and we need to keep our eyes on is the 20 December 2024 submissions to the PADA. So do please get your best information together and get them in to us. That will help us to commence our assessments in the new year and to deliver the packer, which is currently targeted to mid-2025. And please reach out via the Network Assessments inbox for any one-on-one meetings that you'd like to have, or if you have questions or would like to discuss further. And that is the end of our presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Carl, and thanks, Cheryl. Some great information there. I suppose just to sort of summarise, it's as you said, that real sort of key deadline is that 20th of December. We're really looking for the most up-to-date information on those solutions, the best possible pricing information on those solutions as well. And it seems like we're also trying to take a more flexible approach by allowing reopening. We're sort of locked into some of that initial syncons out to 2029, but we desperately want to hear from the market around other potential solutions that may be of lower overarching costs than syncons post 2020. So questions we can now take either through the Q&A function, or you can raise your hand and we can take those verbally. So we do have our first question from Laura. Do you consider other technologies that are not listed in your portfolios?
So we have not. I'm not aware of any that we should, but if there are other technologies people are aware of, do please let us know.
So it's not too late, Carl. If there's another technology that hasn't been considered in the portfolios as yet, there is still time to provide information on that.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Laura. Next one's from Tim. Can you just explain point 4 on slide 22? You might have to go back to that one, Carl, regarding transfer of revenue from energy while providing the service. So if you can maybe just go back to...
Yeah. It's slide 22? Oh, 21.
Maybe this one here. Yeah.
Yeah. So the way that the system is set up, when someone is dispatched to provide system strength, if there's energy revenue associated with that, then it transfers to the TNSP. So example might be if you're a spinning machine that's not generating, so you're a load, and you might be, I don't know, let's say you're generating 10 megawatts. If the price is negative, say it's at the floor minus $1,000, then 10 times 1,000, $10,000 every hour would be paid by the market to the proponent and then passed through to the TNSP. If the spot price was positive, so it was $100 a megawatt hour, 10 megawatts, then $1,000 of cost would be incurred. That would again be passed through to the proponent and then passed through us as the system service provider. So if someone then elects to operate commercially, that then all goes away, is my understanding of how AEMO has explained it. But while it's dispatched for system strength, that exposure to the price is passed through to the system strength service provider, or TNSP it says there, which is Powerlink for Queensland. And so that's different to how our regulatory frameworks generally work, where things are normally known and fixed in advance, where having exposure to that volatility is challenging for us to manage. So looking for ways to help manage that exposure.
Cool. Tim, can you just give me a thumbs up or a thing? Did that answer your question, or? You there, Tim? We'll move on to the next question. And Tim, obviously, if we have...
No, sorry, I was trouble with the unmuting.
That's all right.
Yeah, no, that does clarify what I thought it said. Yep, it's pretty important to understand that.
Yeah,
cool. Just wanted to make sure we answered that query.
Yep.
Thanks, Tim. The next question is from Andrew. What is the maximum contract term that will be considered to amortise capital expenditure over?
That's a challenging one. I think it probably depends a bit on the need. So as Cheryl mentioned earlier in the slides, that the need is there's a lot of uncertainty and things can change as we navigate this. So there's a general preference to keep the contract window shorter. So if a need disappears or changes, we've got some flexibility there. But it really does depend on what we're doing. If someone's got a large capital investment, then we would seek longer contract timeframes. I think generally 10 years is kind of the maximum that we're comfortable with. If there was a reason to go beyond, we could challenge that thinking. But yeah, it really does come down to the technology type, and the longer contracts would really be for where some capital investment happened and we wanted to bring down that annual cost, where things that were already existing or don't have that large capital to recoup, we try and get those contracts shorter.
Cool. Thanks, Carl. Just the next question, you might want to just flick to the slide which has got the timeline on it. It's from Adrian. What does the 2nd of December 2025 relate to? What options does Powerlink intend to commit on by then?
So the December 2025 timing is related to when AEMO is required to basically go live with the system. So they will start scheduling and dispatching system strength services. And what is that? That's just over a year from now. That system will go live. So that's our target. So any early requirements will be delivered by them. So for AEMO system to work, there has to be some contracts in there to schedule.
Cool, thanks. The next question is from Ujwal. Hi, in one of the slides for assessment, it is mentioned that some level of short-term overlading capability is to be assessed. I assume that this is for fault current contribution only, not for other two items of the RIT-T. Is this correct? Geez, I hope I read that out correctly, but...
I'll just go back. I think that's the... nearly there. I think it was this one. Cheryl, did you want to talk to that?
Yes, so it's related to the efficient need, so the stable waveform requirement, not the minimum need. And in our patter in Appendix I, it talks about like what tests can be conducted in PSCAD to do that, which would be a phase angle jump test close to the limits of the batteries, just seeing what happens there. And also we would accept information from the manufacturer about how that overloading is actually implemented and how current limitations are implemented as well. So yeah, so the main point of that is ensuring that we can maintain that stable voltage requirement for the efficient services. I don't know if that answers your question there.
You can come off mute if you just want to clarify anything further, Ujwa.
Hi, yeah, it does clarify. But just the follow-up question was, because in the READ-T you have 3 different services options. One is the reactive power, and then you have fault level, and also inertia. Now, when you were talking about overloading capability, do you mean that you would require that overloading capability for dynamic reactive support as well?
So it's just for the system strength requirement. We're not talking about inertia here or reactive plants. So yeah, it is about the dynamic responses of the battery.
I wonder, Cheryl, if there's an angle there where part of that thinking for us is if batteries are on the rail, you're either fully charging or fully discharging, that overload capacity leaves some space for moving reactive power around and still meeting system strength without having to put constraints on the commercial operation. Is that an aspect as well, Cheryl?
Yeah, sort of. It's just about that. So if you look at the Appendix I, we're talking about the overloading capability for around 1 second. So we're not talking about reactive control for voltage control. You probably need it for a bit longer. This is just about that time frame where you might be operating near the limits, and it's just making sure that the waveforms are maintained to a level that's not going to cause any issues. For example, if you are hitting your current limitation, is it distorted? Are your waveforms distorted, and how does that impact on other plant in the network? So it's really about that dynamic range, and we're just talking about system strength support for this particular short-term overloading consideration.
Cool. Thanks, Cheryl. Next question is from Cole. Are there any further guidelines on what should be included in submissions due by the 20th of December? There are some requirements within the padded document. Technical and financials, but it's not fully clear on what additional documents should or could be submitted to support a submission. So maybe, Carl, if you can give a bit more detail on that would be great.
Yeah, so the information that we need is all in the actually, I don't know what appendix it is, but there's an appendix in the back that's got basically a pro forma with all the information that we require. There's no specific other information, but if you do have other information packs, we're certainly very happy to receive them and see what information's in there.
So if someone believes that there is a document that could support their submission, then we'd be very happy to receive that.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Next one's from Jason. For synchronous machines, how frequently do you anticipate to call upon this service in a 24-hour period? Is it likely that the service will be called upon for 5 minutes and then switched off for the next 5-minute trading interval?
I hope not. I'm going to say potentially. The challenge for us is that we won't be calling on the service at all. It will be AEMO and their scheduling system, which is still in development. So how it will actually work is a bit unknown. But we're hoping that any cost associated with those activities will be covered with startup fees, variable fees, fixed fees, energy costs. Is the hope, but how long it will actually run for is fully up to the scheduling engine and how it works, which is outside of our scope and control.
Yeah, thanks. Next question is from Ace Power. Will PowerLink be shortlisting the projects for system strength contracts based on the PATA submissions, or is that post the PACA?
Oh, sorry, can you say again?
Will PowerLink be shortlisting projects for the system strength contracts based on the PATA submissions, or will that be done post the PACA?
Well, so it will be based on the PATA submissions. Whether it's before or post the PACA will depend. There are some that I expect we'll need to get by the end of 2025 ready for go live, and we'll have to progress them very quickly. Others that are later, so if there's a service that's 2030, aligns with the 2030 need, we would look to contract those later, but we would still be hoping to use the PATA submission information in selecting those services.
So a bit of a staged contracting process, but we really need that as much detailed information prior to the 20th of December to enable us to then put together that contracting strategy.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Stephen's just asked, in regards to dispatching units for system strength, will a new dispatch system be stood up between participants, TNSPs and AEMO, or will the existing systems be used?
That is it known? Is it unknown? My hope is that the existing systems will be leveraged, but to what extent, I don't really know. Again, AEMO is developing those systems, and I'm not sure entirely what stage they're at and how much they've nailed down, but yeah.
Is that probably something better for AEMO to comment on, Carl, would it? Or?
I definitely, and I hope they leverage existing systems where they can, but what will actually be required and how it will work and what will be there on the go live date and how it will evolve over time is really for AEMO to comment on.
Sure if anyone from AEMO is on the call today, but maybe you can put a comment in the Q&A if you have any updates on that one. Another question from Andrew, is coal being considered for short-term services? And if so, how will dispatch between energy and system strength services be managed, particularly with regards to the transfer of energy pricing during negative periods where coal may otherwise seek to turn off?
Few parts to that one. So I'll probably start with the pricing aspect. So if we do need to bring a generator online, that would normally have been off, they'll be activated for system strength. Cost associated with that will be covered by us. Any energy revenue, positive or negative, will flow through to the TNSP. So that's how I expect that would work. In terms of whether we're going to contract, it's hard to say. We are, again, talked I think a few times through that presentation, expecting machines to be online for energy. If there's not enough, then we will need to get contracts and fill those gaps. My hope is that there will be enough, but we certainly will respond and grab those contracts if we need.
Next one's from Sushan. Is it possible to share any technical expectation and assessment guideline document for grid forming services?
Might defer to you, Cheryl, on that one.
Yeah, so we, in Appendix I of the PATA, we sort of provided a summary of our expectations. I guess to note that the overarching performance of the grid forming batteries should also meet the existing connection process. So all of the fault right through, everything else is per standard. And then in Appendix I, we're talking about, in addition to that, what we expect for fault right through, for example, under weaker systems, frequency responses and short-term overloading, and expectation of mode changes and stuff like that. So we try to put as much as we can into that expectation, and certainly when we get submissions on the pattern, we delve into the details of each submission. We have conversations with each participant that will be fleshed out individually as well, because every manufacturer has different implementations of the grid forming plant. But we've tried to put the generic stuff into the pattern there in Appendix I.
Thanks, Cheryl. The next question is from Daniel. Was there base inertia in brackets H used for the Syncon assessment modelling?
Over to you again, Cheryl.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we did assume some level of inertia when we replaced the coal units with Syncons, and we tried to do some assessments of how that could impact on other aspects of stability. That's just the minimum. We might want to procure more depending on if there's inertia shortfalls declared as well. But for I think Carl, correct me if I'm wrong, like the initial few Syncons we will be procuring, we will be considering inertia for those. And yes, that was assumed in our assessments as well.
Yeah, so we have included in the PADA a value option section, which really, if we procure a Syncon, the cost to include a flywheel, for example, is I can't remember exactly the cost, but maybe it's 5 or 10% or some number. That's not like double the cost of a unit. So we have included a piece in there just to say it's an incremental cost and heads off a future need. So we do procure a new Syncon, we would put a flywheel on there. But if we procure an existing one or something, then we probably we think about whether to put a flywheel on the back, but it probably wouldn't be that incremental cost. But definitely be thinking about that for any new Syncons that we procure.
Thanks, Carl. Sushan's got another question. Detailed BESS model means, are you referring to the PS CAD model we usually submit as part of a GPS package? Thanks.
Correct. Yes, that's right. So, I mean, the reason why we pointed that out is it depends on the stage of the BESS project. So, if you already have the PSCAD model in your application, that is the same model. The expectation is that it's the same settings as well for GPS compliance. But then we're just checking those extra functions. So yes, that's correct.
Thanks. Adrian's got a question. When does Powerlink intend to provide a draft contract, and will the contract include availability obligations?
So in terms of the second part, will it include availability? Definitely. When will we provide a draft contract? It will be early in the piece. So when submissions close, we've done our assessments, we know what we're doing for those early tranche 1 contracts. How long will it take to pull it together? I don't actually know. Hopefully a couple of months, maybe less, to pull the contract together, but then get it out as soon as we can.
So early 2025, or is that a realistic time?
I'm always surprised by how long things take, but I hope so.
Yeah. As soon as possible we can. Henry, good to see you, Henry. Are BESS capable of changing between grid forming and grid following modes?
Cheryl.
So I think there are some implementations depending on the manufacturer where if in certain disturbances they could change into grid following mode or use grid following as well as grid forming. It really depends on the manufacturer. And that's really the reason why we've, because the term grid forming could be viewed very differently between manufacturers, and implementation is different between each battery type. So that's why we mentioned that if they are shortlisted to provide the system strength service, then we wouldn't want to have a mode change between grid forming and grid following. We would just want the grid forming aspect of their plant, and that would be discussed in detail when we're talking to the projects.
Could I just raise a question on that?
Yeah, go for it, Henry.
Yeah, how are you, Jared? No, thank you for that, because that was a bit of discovery from my part. But that would raise a whole lot of risk concerns, wouldn't it, Cheryl? In the sense that whether it's GPS or whatever, and then subsequent response in a power system disturbance, I would have thought that would really concern the parties if that I wouldn't call it capability, but that feature actually manifested itself under some circumstances. I thought it was pretty homogenous, either one or the other, but you've just indicated that you believe it's so. In the absence of an absolute standard definition of it, we run the risk how you described it, and that should be a red flag, I would have thought, as we go through this process.
Yeah, that's right. So that's why we sort of highlighted it. I mean, the connection application process, as you know, Henry, is quite robust, so not robust, quite stringent in its checks, and especially now in the new framework, you know, to show withstand capabilities. I guess that what we're looking for this service is for them not to change any settings or anything like that to be able to provide the service, so that you're like kind of avoiding going into that mode by changing settings and stuff like that. So that's kind of, for this particular service, we're adding even more scrutiny to what's looked at in the connection process, because we want a higher level of guarantee that we're getting like a truly grid forming provision, and that can support the network.
Look, totally agree with that, but it sort of has raised a red flag that under, you know, is the old Swiss cheese lining up and suddenly exposing you, not in the instance just system strength, I'm talking about in general. So that's been a bit of a revelation from my perspective. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Henry. Next question is from Jin. How do you quantify the required system strength amount from dynamic studies for GFM? I think that's grid, could be either GFM BESS, and reflected in the pricing structure.
I'm going to go to you, Cheryl.
I think I might need your help with the pricing there, Carl, but like the so the quantity, so everything that I think I mentioned in one of the slides is it's all based on assumptions made in the studies so particularly if we're talking about BESS quantities, where we looked at BESS for efficient services, that the assumption we used for that underlying is the inverter-based resources, so the wind and solar forecast that AEMO provide. And so if AEMO provide X megawatt of wind and solar in a particular year, then when we did the studies, we put that number of megawatts into our studies, and we checked, well, how much battery do we need in these areas to be able to support those additional forecasted generation. And there is a little bit of uncertainty there because the forecast could change, and then the quantity of the BESS could change. We did make some assumptions as well, as I mentioned, on the battery sizes being being more optimal between 200 and 300 megawatt. And these were just generic assumptions we used. And so then by putting those sizes of batteries in the area where there's forecasted increasing wind and solar, we came up with the quantity that and the areas of need that you see on the slide. So that's how we did it. But as I said, everything's underlying that is based on the forecasts assumptions that we are using from AEMO. And I'm not sure how to answer the pricing.
Yeah, I'll have a go. The thinking in my mind, so however that comes out in the technical studies that we do to assess a battery, I kind of, in my mind, just to simplify it, turn it into these circles on the diagram. So, you know, each circle up there is a battery of 200 to 300 megawatts. You know, if your battery was half of a circle, then, you know, it's a competitive process. We'll have to find something to fill the other half of the circle. Between those prices, how does it compare to other solutions? I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, it sounds like a technical one, and maybe again, the team here is happy to have a more detailed one-on-one discussions off the back of this webinar on that, Jin. If you wanted to do that, you could reach out through the email, and we could organise a more detailed conversation on that. Just the next question.
I just say very happy to have those conversations and set them up. I think they help us and everyone understand.
Just the next question from Lalit. What's the minimum H value approximately? I think that is that back referring to the inertia, or?
I think so. What we used was like an equivalent inertia to the size of the unit that I think he's talking about synchronous condensers that we use for the studies, and our sizes are around 200 MVA, sort of. So the equivalent H for that. Do you want the actual figure or?
I wonder, Cheryl, I mean, we're not specifically looking for inertia in this RIT. It's something that we're happy to get as a byproduct, which will be really great. And certainly that flywheel discussion earlier where we look to leverage it where we can. But not specifically looking to land inertia. But when we do these studies, we do have to make assumptions and put figures in there. So I wonder, Cheryl, would it change our assessment much if the H moved around?
I don't think it would change the outcomes of what we need, especially because the for minimum, and so for synchronous condensers that you're talking about is for the minimum consideration, and we're trying to aim for the equivalent amount of minimum that we currently have. So it wouldn't necessarily change the outcome. We did do some further assessments on impacts to other power system stability considerations using also assumed H values. And yeah, we think we're okay with what we've done. But yeah, as you said, like inertia considerations could also be part of a separate requirement.
Okay. Just conscious of the time, we've got about 8 minutes left, so we'll try and get through as many questions as we can. Next one's from Andrew. What is the expected financial impact of not meeting the availability obligation? Have we done any calculations on that, Carl?
Oh, so we did do, and it's I believe in the PATA. We certainly talked about it on the way, and I might need to check, but there should be in the PATA a what's the name? A chart of unserved energy, and we've included unserved energy in our economic assessment and that's a large part of why the estimated benefits are positive. And it was quite a lot. Like if we don't meet the minimum and the system, the power system can't operate, then basically the states or regions are offline. So it's quite an extensive impact. In terms of the efficient, it's more about IBR that is not able to generate. But how much impact that will be depends on how many self-remediate, how the forecast changes over time. I don't think we've done a lot in that space. That's certainly something we could consider if there's value.
Okay, thanks, Carl. Craig had a question. How is the system strength being assessed for grid forming compared to synchronous machines, given the current methodology looking at fault current contributions and fault levels is not necessarily the optimal guide to voltage signal strength? Do you want me to repeat that again, or you're happy, Cheryl, to take that one?
I'll try to answer it. So if we're talking about comparing it for the stable voltage requirement.
Craig, did you want to just come off mute and maybe just quickly let's just make sure we get this right, the context?
Sure. So my question is mostly based around the idea that obviously synchronous, like when we're looking at system strength shortfall stuff, we look at MVA at certain locations, and that basically is in a sense it's at the moment based around a guide that how close are you to a synchronous, to a large generation source effectively. And I guess obviously that's going to change as coal disappears and these larger physical generators disappear. So that when you're looking at synchronous, so when you're looking at grid forming technology, it doesn't necessarily add as much to the fault level in comparison to the actual impact it has on maintaining the voltage signal staying stable. And I just wanted to understand that how you're sort of taking, for the apples to apples approach between the grid forming technologies and the existing sort of synchronous technology.
Okay, so maybe there's multiple layers to that. So I think in our PATA we did mention that for that underlying support that you're talking about, the reference to the voltage and frequency, basically, we're really looking at synchronous-based plant to provide that for the time being, and then once we get more of an understanding of the grid forming BESS functionality, which, as you rightly pointed out, is not just based on a fault level. It's based on the capabilities and support it can provide to the network, including protection, operation, and other broader system stability aspects. We might try to consider how we could, what the equivalent might be, what we might need. But for the assessments that we did, it wasn't actually based on fault level. We did everything in PSCAD, wide area network studies. But the underlying base of the minimum was a synchronous machine base, so synchronous condensers or synchronous generators, and then adding grid forming BESS on top of that for the efficient. And so we weren't really calculating what the fault level was. We were just saying, does that provide stable outcomes? I'm not sure if that answers your question there, but
I think it does, but obviously it sounds like in the future maybe it'll have to be sort of a different assessment way of not necessarily putting the synchronous at the base, but I guess at the moment it sounds that the main focus is on the syncons and basically sticking with the existing technology, but hopefully there's some sort of I guess shift as you go along, that you start to look more at these new technologies and I guess the differences from the standard synchronous technology, which is kind of, at the moment, it sounds like that's where you're heading to try and, I guess, because it's quicker and easier from the point of view of, your comfort level with where it's at. But obviously in the future, you may need to look at try and do a proper apples to apples sort of comparison with grid forming, because obviously in sense of the system strength, in many ways, it seems that a grid forming technology may likely punch above its weight in terms of that it may have a better impact than, same size of synchronous, only because it works in a different way. And, that's, so hopefully that makes sense, I guess.
yeah, no, I totally understand. Actually, we didn't really touch on it in this presentation, but in the paddle, we said we would be doing some works to understand the grid forming batteries in terms of its use in the minimum, which we're hoping to start next year, and maybe take around a year to look at that. And it will require some careful consideration of like those aspects you just touched on, but also further consideration of protection operation, correct protection operation, and impacts to other stability problems like transient stability, which aren't necessarily like obvious in terms of system strength. So the BESS could provide system strength, but maybe it could impact other aspects of how we manage our power system. So we will be looking into it and see what happens after that work occurs.
Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you.
Thanks. And look, we do have a couple of questions that we're probably not going to get time to, but what we can probably do is commit to maybe responding to those questions via email after the webinar. Just want to sort of say a massive thanks to everyone who turned up. I think we had more than 90 people on here today. We have recorded this session and we will make it available, post it. So please share it with your colleagues who could not attend today. It's really, really important for us to engage appropriately with the market and get that information back so that we can make the best decisions moving forward in this area. I do want to say a big thanks to Carl and Cheryl for the presentation today. Excellent job. Well done. And I think we had some really good questions off the back of what was a really good presentation. Just also from my team, massive thanks to Eleanor for putting a heap of work into organising today as well. So thank you very much. We look forward to hearing more about your projects and seeing your submissions by the 20th of December. Afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jerry. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.